I am Elena Walker, 32 years old, at my grandfather's 70th birthday party, in a room full of relatives and soft music. My father stood up in front of everyone and said I was not his biological daughter. The sentence dropped into the air like a cold knife. The laughter shut off, and every look turned toward me in a heavy silence, and I stood inside my own family feeling like a stranger who had just been named out loud in front of a crowd. If you have ever had a moment where you felt you did not belong in your own family, leave a comment and share your story. Maybe we will realize the same kinds of silences exist in a lot of homes. Just a few minutes earlier, everything still looked like a perfect family picture, warm yellow light on familiar faces, congratulations rising around a big birthday cake set in the middle of the living room, my grandfather smiling gently, my aunts and uncles chatting brightly, and I stood beside my mother holding a glass of wine with a vague feeling like I was attending someone else's party. My father sat at the head of the table like always, his face stern, practiced at controlling the atmosphere in the house, from where people sat to which stories were allowed to be told at the party. My mother stood beside him, smiling at the guests, but her eyes were not happy. I had been used to that image for years, a woman living quietly inside the role of an obedient wife. When it was my turn to raise a glass to my grandfather, I said only a few simple lines, that I was grateful he had always loved me since I was little, and I wished him good health. I did not plan to say anything else, but right then my father stood up, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded room. He said today was not only a birthday, it was also the day to speak a truth that had been hidden for far too long. The air in the room changed immediately. The laughter faded out. A few people turned to look at each other. My mother trembled slightly, her hand gripping the edge of her blouse. My father said that for 32 years he had never been sure I was his biological child, that from the moment I was born he had carried a doubt he could not name. And today he did not want to keep pretending. Those words fell into the room like an invisible weight, pressing down on every person sitting there. I heard a spoon tap lightly against a plate. I heard a deep inhale somewhere. Then everything sank into silence. I looked at my father, the man I spent my entire childhood trying to please, and in that moment I understood why I had always felt different in this family. I did not cry. I did not argue. I just stood there, as if my whole body had turned to stone. My mother lowered her head and said nothing. Her silence hurt more than any explanation ever could. I left the party in silence. I did not say goodbye to anyone. I did not look back. The music behind me suddenly felt far away, like it belonged to another world. Driving home, old pieces of memory surfaced clearer than ever. The way my father's eyes when he looked at me were never the same as the eyes he gave my brothers and sisters. The times I got high scores and received only a cold nod. The dinners where I was always the one who spoke the least. When I was little, I used to think it was because I was not good enough, that if I tried just a little harder, my father would finally look at me differently. My mother always said my father was simply demanding that I should understand him. I believed her. I believed her so completely that I forgot my own feelings. I grew up afraid of making mistakes, and with a quiet question I never dared to say out loud whether I truly belonged to this family or not. When I reached my small apartment, I sat down on the sofa in the dark. I did not turn on the lights. I looked into the mirror on the wall, trying to find something familiar from my father in my face, but the longer I looked, the more foreign I felt. My dark hair, my eyes that looked like no one else in the house, and a tired expression I had never really noticed before. That night I did not sleep. Questions kept circling in my head. If I was not my father's child, then who was I? If that doubt existed for 32 years, then why did nobody tell me sooner? I did not feel as angry as I expected. What I felt most clearly was emptiness, like a piece of my identity had just been taken with no explanation. From the moment my father spoke that doubt at the birthday party, my life started turning in another direction. I did not know where the road ahead would take me, but I knew I could not go back to being the woman who stood silently in the corner of the living room anymore. I had to step out of my old role to go find an answer no one had ever given me in 32 years. I started by going to a private testing lab in the suburbs, where nobody knew who I was and nobody asked where I came from. The nurse handed me a form. I filled in my name with a slight tremble in my handwriting. Elena Walker, 32, reason for testing. Establish biological parentage. When the needle pricked my fingertip, I did not feel pain. What made me more uncomfortable was the feeling that I was betraying a family that raised me. But at the same time, I understood the truth is not betrayal, it is only a late answer. During the 7 days of waiting, I still went to work like normal. I still sat in front of my computer screen. I still replied to coworkers' emails. But my mind was not there. Every time my phone rang, my chest tightened, like someone was calling me back to a different identity. At night, I dreamed I was standing in the middle of a long road, with two identical houses on both sides. I did not know which one to walk into, and when I woke up, my pillow was damp with cold sweat. I told no one about the test, not my mother, not my brothers and sisters. I feared their eyes, their questions, and most of all, their pity. I had lived 32 years inside a clear role, a Walker daughter, a sister, a good child, and now because of one sheet of paper, everything could collapse like a house made of sand. On the day I got the results, I went to the lab alone. The receptionist handed me a white envelope, thin and light, but holding it felt like holding my whole life. I did not open it right away. I sat in my car for a long time watching people move along the sidewalk. They laughed and talked. They called family. They looked certain about where they belonged, and I did not. When I finally opened the envelope, my eyes stopped on a single line: no biological relationship. I read it again, then a third time, like the words might change if I stared long enough. They did not change, they stayed there. Cold and clear, like a stamp pressed onto my entire childhood. I drove home in silence, no radio, no news. The city sliding past my window like a silent film. I replayed every family dinner, every awkward hug from my mother, every rare compliment from my father, and I wondered, if there was no blood, were those moments real, or were they only obligation? That evening I went to my parents' house. My mother opened the door. She froze when she saw me, like she already knew why I was there. I set the envelope on the table. I did not speak. I only looked at her. She sat down, hands clasped together, and at last she said the thing I had never heard in 32 years. She told me I was not the child she gave birth to. That year she had complications during delivery. Her biological baby did not survive, and in a panicked decision, they took me from another hospital, with no clear process, no transparent paperwork, only a promise that I would be raised like their own. My father never got past that. He looked at me every day like a question with no answer. I listened without crying. My tears felt like they had already run out since the night of the party. I asked my mother why she did not tell me sooner. She said she was afraid of losing me, afraid that one day I would leave the house to go find another family. That hurt more than the truth about blood, because for 32 years I had been there. I never planned to leave, yet they lived with the fear of losing me as if I were a stranger. When I left their house, it was already dark. I walked for a long time, not knowing where I was going, only knowing that for the first time in my life, I no longer had a clear definition of family. I was not angry. I was not blaming. I just felt like a child placed in the wrong room. And now I had to find my own way out. That night, I sat by my apartment window, looking at the distant city lights, thinking about the woman who gave birth to me, a woman whose face I had never seen, whose voice I had never heard. I wondered if she ever thought of me, if she ever regretted it, or if she knew that one day her daughter would come looking for her in silence. I understood that from this moment on, my journey was no longer about finding the truth. It was about finding an answer to a bigger question: who I am when I am no longer standing inside the name Walker, where I belong when every familiar thread becomes fragile. And even if I was not ready to face that road, I knew I could not turn my back on it, because some truths, once exposed, never allow us to live the same way again. After that conversation with my mother, I did not go back to my parents' house for many days. I needed time to breathe, time to get used to the feeling that I no longer fully belonged to the place I had called home for 32 years. Each morning, I still woke up to the same ceiling, the same sunlight through my small apartment window, but inside me there was a new empty space, a space named Origin. I started searching for old papers my mother had kept. A thin birth record, a few faded lines on hospital paper, no name for my biological mother, only a code and a date. I brought them to the records room of the old hospital, where files were stored in tall metal cabinets reaching the ceiling. The clerk searched for a long time, then finally shook their head and said many records from that time were lost. Paperwork conflicts and chaotic years had erased the traces of many people. I walked out of the hospital on a windy afternoon. The city was crowded, yet I felt more alone than ever. I realized finding a biological mother is not like finding an address on a map. It is finding a story that was cut away from my life, and I did not know what I would meet at the end of that road. In the nights that followed, I began to dream more. In my dream, I saw a woman standing with her back to me, her hair long and dark. She did not speak, she just stood in an empty field, and when I called to her, she slowly dissolved into the light. I woke up with the feeling that I had just lost something very important that I never truly had. I told my best friend Clara, the only person I trusted enough to say everything. We sat in a small coffee shop with rain on the window. I told her about the birthday party, the test results, my mother's confession. Clara did not interrupt. She only held my hand when my silence lasted too long. She said that no matter where I came from, I was still the Elena she had known for 10 years, and that did not change because of a test on paper. Her words did not erase the emptiness in me, but they helped me understand I still had something to hold on to. I did not completely disappear from the world just because of a late truth. Some bonds are built from time and care, not only from blood. A few days later, I got a call from the hospital where I was listed as born in the old records. An older nurse said she vaguely remembered a special delivery that year. A young woman came in alone to give birth, no family with her, and she left very quickly after. She was not sure it was me, but she gave me a name, Emily Carter. That name echoed in my head all afternoon. Emily Carter. 2 simple words, but to me it felt like a door cracking open. I did not know where that woman was, how she was living, or even if she was still alive, but for the first time I had a lead, something real to grab onto. That night I sat at my computer for a long time, typing her name into the search bar. Page after page appeared and slid past, people with the same name, lives that had nothing to do with me. I felt exhausted, but I also realized this journey was not going to end in one night. Before bed, I stood in front of the mirror and studied my face for a long time. I tried saying the name Emily Carter silently in my head, like calling someone I had never met. I did not know if that woman would want to meet me, but I knew I could not pretend I was not curious anymore. A quiet fear started growing in me. Fear that when I found her, I would not find what I hoped for. Fear that the truth would be more complicated than anything I already knew. But alongside that fear was something deeply human, the desire to see the face that gave me this life, even just once. I closed the computer and lay down, listening to distant cars moving outside. I understood that from this moment my life was no longer a straight line. It had split into another path, where I had to walk slowly and accept that not every question comes with a gentle answer. But no matter what I had started, and once I had started, I no longer had the courage to go back to being the woman who was afraid to ask about herself. Part 4. I began looking for Emily Carter with everything I could do as an ordinary person. I called the hospital many more times, asked about old files, asked about retired nurses, asked about any notes still left in storage. Every answer I got was vague and scattered, like broken pieces of a mirror that could not be put together into a complete face. Some days I felt like I was chasing a shadow that did not exist. The city was still loud like always. Cars still passed my apartment window every morning. But inside me there was a different rhythm, slower and heavier. I started to understand that searching for my birth mother was not only about finding a person, it was about facing the part of the past I had never been allowed to know. Clara called me almost every night. She asked if I had eaten, if I had slept, and if I had found any new clue. I told her about the failed calls, the hospital staff shaking their heads, the feeling of walking down a long hallway with no doors. Clara said I did not need to rush. Some stories need time to open on their own, and I should not force myself to move too fast. One afternoon, I decided to go to the old neighborhood near the hospital where I was listed as born. It was worn and aged. Low houses with weathered wooden fences, small shops selling second-hand things, and dried flowers. I walked slowly, looking at each doorway, not knowing who I was searching for, yet feeling a hard-to-explain familiarity in my chest, like my feet had known this road for a long time. I stopped at a small diner where a middle-aged woman was wiping tables. I asked her about the name Emily Carter. She thought for a moment and said many years ago a young girl had lived at the end of the street, lived alone, and worked at a sewing shop. She was not sure it was knowing, but she remembered the girl left very suddenly after having a baby. My heart beat harder when I heard that. Another piece appeared, fragile but enough to make me believe I was not walking in the dark. I asked more, but she just shook her head and said it was a long time ago. People come and go like wind, no one can hold them. That night I sat in my apartment looking out the window and thinking about that young woman back then. I imagined her standing in a small room holding a newborn, not knowing where she would go tomorrow, not knowing if she had the strength to keep the baby with her. I did not blame her, because I understood some choices are not made from a lack of love, but because there is no other road left. For the first time, I felt something soften inside me. All this time I had only thought about my own emptiness and forgot that on the other end of this story there was also a woman who had suffered in her own way. If she truly was my mother, then her life might have carried a quiet cut like the one I carried now. A week later, I got an email from a resident records center. They said they found an old temporary registration under the name Emily Carter in a coastal town more than 200 kilometers from the city. I read the address again and again, afraid I was seeing it wrong. A real place, a town with a name, streets, people living their lives. I sat staring at the screen for a long time, not knowing if I should feel happy or scared. If I went there and found no one, I would be back at zero. If I found her, what would I say? Who was I in her life? An old memory, or something she wanted to forget? Clara told me I should go, not to demand anything, but to give myself an answer. She said some trips are not meant to change the past. They are meant to help us understand how we ended up here. I packed a small bag, a few outfits, and my paperwork. The night before I left, I could not sleep. I lay listening to rain tapping softly against the window, thinking about tomorrow, thinking about a meeting that might happen or might never happen. I felt a very clear fear, but also a strange calm, like I had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The next morning, I drove out of the city while the sky was still pale with fog. The tall buildings fell back behind me, replaced by fields and a long, straight road. I felt like I was leaving the life I knew and stepping into another chapter, one with no Walker parents, no silent family dinners, only me and one question. Was the woman named Emily Carter my mother or not? The whole way I did not turn on music. I wanted to hear every sound of the car, every breath I took. I was afraid if another sound slipped in, I would not have the courage to keep going to the end of this road. When the ocean started to appear in the distance, I knew I was close. The smell of salt rode in on the wind through my window, and in that moment I realized that no matter what the result was, this trip had already changed me. I was not the woman standing far away from her own question anymore. I was walking straight into it, slowly. I stopped at the edge of the town as the sun was rising. The small road into the quiet neighborhood felt strangely still. I held the paper with the address in my hand and stood there a long time before moving forward. Some doors, once opened, never closed the same way again, and I knew my life was standing in front of a door like that. I went to the address from the file late that morning, a narrow road into a nearly empty seaside neighborhood, only wind and the sharp smell of salt in the air. The house was at the end of the street, the white paint peeling, a row of low trees in front. It looked no different from the homes around it, but to me it was a place that could hold the answer I had been chasing for months. I stood at that door for a long time, gripping the paper, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid the person inside could hear it. I did not know if I should knock as a stranger or as a child coming back. I also did not know if the woman behind that door would remember me at all. Finally, I knocked. The sound was dry and blunt in the quiet street. A moment later, the door opened, and I saw a woman in her 50s. Her hair was streaked with silver, her face carried the wrinkles of sea wind and time. When her eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of surprise, then caution. I introduced myself, said I came from the city and I was looking for someone named Emily Carter. The woman stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded slightly, and said she was Emily. Her voice was low and slow, like every word had to be weighed. We sat in a small living room, with an old wooden table, and a few photos on the wall. I did not know where to begin, so I only said I was born at the city hospital 32 years ago, and I was trying to learn about my origin. Emily looked at me for a long time, her expression shifting, from guarded to tired, and then into a sadness she did not hide. She said she had been waiting for this day for a long time, but she also hoped it would never come. Back then, she was very young. She had no family beside her. She could not afford to raise a child. She gave birth alone in the hospital, held me for a few hours, then left, leaving me for others to care for, believing I would have a better life. I listened in silence. No excuses, no dramatic details, only a simple, painful truth that she chose to leave so I could have a different chance. I did not know what to feel, because at the same time, I wanted to blame her. I wanted to hug her, and I wanted to get out of that room as fast as I could. Emily apologized, not with tears, but with the tired voice of someone who had carried this memory for 32 years. She said she did not expect me to forgive her. She only wanted me to know that choice was not because she did not love me. It was because she was not strong enough to keep me. I asked about her life after. She said she moved to this town, worked at a sewing shop, then married a man who worked at sea. They did not have children. She said it very softly, like she did not want to hurt herself one more time. In that small room, I looked at the photos on the wall, a young man smiling by the beach, an old house, a dog lying at the front door. There was not a single picture of a child. I realized Emily's life had been built around an empty space, just like mine. We did not hug. There was no tearful reunion like in a movie. There were only two women sitting across from each other. Strangers, yet sharing the same lines in our faces, the same way of resting our hands on the table when silent. I saw myself in her, and I saw her in me, in a very quiet way. Before I stood up to leave, Emily said she did not dare hope that I would call her mother. She only hoped I knew that she had always thought of me, even without knowing where I was. I nodded, and could not say anything more. Some words cannot come out during a first meeting. When I stepped out of that house, the afternoon light had faded. The sea wind passed through me and made me feel cold even though it was summer. I walked a long stretch along the shore, watching the waves roll in again and again, and what I felt was not relief, but a strange stillness, like a huge question had finally taken shape, even without a complete answer. That night I rented a small room in town. I lay listening to the waves outside the window and thought about the two women who gave birth to me and raised me, each in a different way. I was no longer angry, no longer blaming, only left with a soft sadness, like moonlight on the ocean. It does not hurt the water, but it does not fully light it either. I understood that this meeting did not close the story. It only opened a new chapter. One where I had to learn how to live with two truths at the same time. That I was born to a woman named Emily Carter, and raised by another woman with the last name, Walker. And somewhere between those two truths, I had to find my own place. I left the seaside town early the next morning, when mist still covered the road and the smell of the sea clung to my clothes. The drive back to the city passed in silence. I did not turn on music. I did not read messages. I just let thoughts drift through my mind like slow clouds. Meeting Emily did not give me the relief I once imagined. It was not a complete healing. It was more like seeing an old scar, understanding why it exists, but still feeling its depth. I knew I could not go back to being the woman I was before, the one who had never questioned where she came from. When I returned to my apartment, I sat on the sofa for a long time, looking around the familiar space that suddenly felt strange. Everything was still there, the table, the lamp, the books, but I was different. I felt like I was carrying two stories at once, the story of the Walker family and the story of Emily Carter, and I did not yet know where to place them in my life. Clara came to see me that evening. I told her about the meeting, about the woman with silver hair and a low voice, about the small house by the sea, about apologies without tears. Clara listened for a long time, and then said that not every meeting needs to end with a hug. Some meetings only need to help us understand that we were not abandoned because we were unworthy, but because others were also weak at the time. For so long, I had carried a quiet belief that I was not important enough to be kept. But now I was starting to understand that Emily's decision was not a rejection of me, It was her way of admitting her own limits back then. A few days later, I returned to my parents' house. The air there was still heavy, but this time I stepped inside with a different feeling. I was no longer there to wait for approval, but to speak about what I had lived through. I told them about the trip, about Emily, about the truth I had learned. My father stayed silent the entire time. My mother cried. She said she had feared this day for a long time, feared that once I knew the truth I would stop calling her mother. I told her that the name does not disappear just because another story is told. 32 years of living together cannot be erased by one journey. I was not a child switched in a file. I was a person who grew up in this house, who learned to call them parents with her entire childhood. My father finally spoke. He said he was sorry for carrying that doubt for so many years without saying it. He admitted that he had let his own insecurity hurt me, and he did not know how to fix it. His voice did not shake, but I heard the exhaustion of a man who had lived too long with a question he was afraid to ask. We sat together for a long time in the living room. There were no big promises, no dramatic lines, only an acknowledgement that this family was not perfect and maybe never had been, but for the first time, we were not pretending everything was fine. When I left the house, it was already dark. I walked a long stretch on the familiar street, and for the first time, I did not feel like I was running away. I knew our relationship would not return to what it once was, but it did not have to completely fall apart. It would exist in another way, slower and more honest. That night, I wrote in my old notebook, recording everything I had been through on this journey. I wrote about the birthday party, the test results, the seaside house, and the living room where I grew up. I realized my life was not a story cut in half. It was a story with an added chapter. I did not know when I would see Emily again, or whether we could build any kind of relationship in the future. But I knew I no longer carried an empty question inside me. I had seen the face of the woman who gave birth to me, heard her story, and that was enough for me to keep living without feeling like a secret. Some truths do not make us happier right away, but they make us more grown. I fell asleep with that feeling, not relieved, but peaceful in a way I had never known before. The days that followed passed more slowly than I expected. I returned to work, to mornings of making coffee and unread emails, but inside me something had quietly shifted. I no longer felt like I was standing at the edge of the Walker family, and I did not feel like I fully belonged to Emily's world either. I was between two stories, and for the first time I did not force myself to choose one. Clara still texted me every night. Sometimes it was just a short question, "Are you okay today?" Sometimes it was a photo of the city sky at sunset. I realized that some relationships do not need shared blood to last. They only need steady presence and honesty. That made me think differently about family. No longer a fixed frame, but the people who stay when we are no longer sure who we are. I started writing letters to Emily, not sending them yet, just writing and keeping them in a drawer. I told her about my life, about my small apartment in the city, about my boring but stable office job, about evenings watching rain through the window. I did not call her mother. I did not use a familiar name. I only used I, like speaking to an old acquaintance I had never met long enough to fully know. Sometimes I wondered how my life would have been if she had not left back then. Would I have grown up in a seaside town, listening to waves each morning, or would I have left like so many young people do? But then, I understood those questions led nowhere. I only had one life that actually happened, with the Walker parents, with Clara, with years I once thought were ordinary. One afternoon I stopped by the park where I used to play as a child. The wooden benches were worn, the trees taller, and children's laughter rang across the grass. I sat there for a long time, watching a young mother chase her child, and felt my chest soften. I no longer looked at that scene with simple admiration, but with a deeper understanding that being a parent is not only about giving birth, it is about staying when there are no easy choices left. I thought about my adoptive mother, the woman who accepted me as her own at a time when she was also afraid. I thought about Emily, the woman who chose to leave because she was not strong enough to keep me. Those two choices were opposite, yet both came from love in their own way. And I, standing between them, no longer wanted to decide right or wrong. That evening I called my adoptive mother. We did not talk much about the past, only simple everyday questions. Had she eaten? Was she tired? But in her voice I heard relief, as if both of us understood there was nothing left to prove. 32 years is long enough to become a bond that cannot be cut by a late truth. I also sent Emily a short message, saying I had returned to the city safely and thanking her for meeting me. She replied much later, just one line, saying she was glad I was okay. No promises, no rushed closeness, only a door left slightly open instead of shut. In the days that followed, I slowly realized I did not need to solve everything at once. I did not need to immediately build a new relationship with Emily, and I did not need to return to the role of the perfect daughter either. I only needed to live with the truth I now knew, and let time arrange the remaining pieces on its own. Some nights I still feel sad, still feel like I am standing between two worlds, not fully belonging to either one, but that sadness no longer scares me. It is like a light rain. It does not collapse the roof. It only makes the air a little heavier. I understand that this journey did not end with the meeting in the seaside town. It will likely continue for a very long time, maybe for my entire life. But unlike before, I am no longer searching for a single answer to the question of who I am. I accept that I am the result of many overlapping stories, and that does not make me any less whole. When I stand in front of the mirror each morning, I no longer try to see who I resemble. I simply see a woman learning how to live with what she knows, without hiding, without denying it. And for the first time, I see in my eyes not confusion, but a new calm, as if I have walked a very long road just to return to myself. That morning I woke up very early, before the city had time to become noisy, the first light of day resting softly on the windowsill like a reminder that life keeps going, even though something inside me has changed. I made myself a cup of coffee, stood watching the traffic slowly thicken below, and for the first time in a long while, I did not feel like I was running away from anything. I knew the truth. I had touched the pieces of life that belonged to me, and now I had only one thing left to do, to learn how to live with all of it without making my heart heavier. I thought about my adoptive mother, the woman who stayed beside me for 32 years with a quiet but steady love. I thought about my biological mother, the woman who lost me for all those years yet kept the hospital bracelet as a proof of hope. Those two women never knew each other, yet they carried the same fear in their hearts, the fear of losing me once more. And I understood that love does not need to be measured by blood, but by who stayed when life became the hardest. I also thought about Clara, the woman who grew into a place in my life that once should have been mine alone. We do not call each other sisters, but there is a deep understanding between us, like two people who walked through the same storm and realized they no longer had to stand alone. Every message she sends, every sunset photo she shares, reminds me that even if the past was rearranged, the present can still be rebuilt with honesty. Some days I still feel sad, still feel empty, especially when I think about my childhood and the long silences in that big house. But that sadness no longer makes me feel lost. It only reminds me that I was once hurt, and the fact that I can still feel pain means I am still living truthfully with myself. I no longer try to erase the past, and I no longer try to paint a perfect future. I simply learn to accept that my life is a story with breaks and gaps, and that does not make it meaningless. One afternoon, I returned to the old Walker house. I stood by the window where I once looked out as a child, wondering why I always felt lonely among so many people. This time I felt no blame. I only felt compassion for the girl I used to be, a child who tried to behave well in order to be loved, without knowing that love does not always have to be earned. I placed my hand on the old wall, took a deep breath, and whispered that it was over now. That evening I called both of my mothers. To my adoptive mother I said that I was still here. To my biological mother I said that I did not yet know how slowly I needed to go, but I would not disappear. No one cried, no one made grand promises, only a few simple words, but they were enough for me to know that the fragile thread between us was still intact. I realized that searching for the truth was not about changing the past. It was about allowing me to move forward without living in doubt anymore. I no longer ask myself where I belong. I only ask whether today I am being kind to myself, whether I have the courage to love without being afraid of loss. And when I can answer those questions, my heart feels much lighter. If someone asked me now what family is, I would not give a clear definition. I would say family is made of imperfect people who still choose to stay when the truth is spoken. Family is a place where we can tremble without being pushed away, where we can be silent and still be understood. My story does not end with a miracle. There is no scene where everyone hugs and cries, and every wound instantly disappears. It ends with a slow peace, with me learning how to stand upright in my own life, no longer hiding in the shadow of a secret. I am still Elena Walker, but I am also the daughter of another woman, and above all, I am myself, a person who has walked through loss to understand the value of truth and love. If you are listening to this story and have ever felt lost inside your own family, I hope you know that you are not alone. Each of us has our own journey to face the things that were never spoken. And sometimes, simply daring to look directly at the truth already means we have taken a very long step on the path toward healing. Thank you for staying until the final moments of this story. If it touched any part of your emotions, please leave a comment and share your thoughts or your own story. And if you want to continue walking with me through future stories about family, about life, and about the things we never quite managed to say out loud, do not forget to like and subscribe so we can meet again in the next stories.